Thomas wakes up in an ascending elevator. With him are supply containers marked WCKD. When the elevator reaches the top, a door above him opens and he's surrounded by a group of men. Thomas takes off running, but stops when he realizes he's in a small glade surrounded by huge walls. Gally subdues Thomas and keeps him from trying to run towards a giant door in the wall. The leader of the group, Albie, and his right-hand man, Newt, explain the situation to Thomas. Once a month, the elevator, or as they call it, the box, comes to the surface with supplies as well as a new guy. They all live in the glade and call themselves gladers. None of them can remember anything about their pasts or why they were sent there, but after a few days their names come back to them. The giant door opens every morning and closes every night. The door leads to a maze that surrounds the glade, and only runners are allowed to go through it to look for a way out. Every night, the maze changes itself, and the cries of a creature called the grievers can be heard. Thomas learns that Albie was the first person to arrive in the glade, and no one knows why they're there. Thomas starts to form a friendship with Chuck, the kid who came up the month before him. That night, there's a celebration for Thomas. Gally is wrestling one of the other boys and asks if Thomas wants to have a go. They end up sparring, and when Thomas hits his head on the ground, he remembers his name. That night, Thomas has a dream, full of fleeting images, and in it is a woman that says, "Wicked is good." Albie takes Thomas around to show him more of the sights. The gladers carve their names on the wall when they arrive, and when they die, the other gladers will cross off the name. Thomas tries to fit in, and he's given the task to go dig up fertilizer from out in the woods. While he's there, he's attacked by Ben, one of the runners who was stung by a griever, causing him tremendous pain, and making him act violently. There's no cure for it, so they force Ben into the maze at night just as the doors are closing. Everyone is concerned that there was a griever attack during the day. That night, Thomas had another dream. It's more of the lady assuring him that Wicked is good, but now he also remembers himself and a girl about the same age sitting across from each other at workstations going over diagnostics. The next day, Albie goes into the maze to retrace Ben's path to find out what happened. The gladers gather around the entrance to the maze as it's almost nightfall, and Albie still hasn't returned. Just as the doors are about to close, the lead runner named Minho appears with a very injured Albie, who was stung by a griever. Thomas rushes into the maze to help them, but the door closes behind him. Minho and Thomas use vines to suspend Albie's body and try to keep it safe from the grievers. One of the grievers appears and chases after Thomas, as the walls in the maze start to change. Finally, Thomas is able to lure the griever between two walls that are colliding, instantly crushing it. The next day, Gally calls for a meeting of the gladers. Most of them are excited that Thomas killed a griever. There's another group though, led by Gally, who feels that the rules they have were put in place to keep everyone safe. Ever since Thomas arrived, things have changed, like grievers attacking during the day. All of a sudden, the elevator arrives. The gladers run out to check what the elevator brought. There were no supplies inside, only a young girl. She looks up and calls out for Thomas, before passing out. In her hand is a note that reads, "She's the last one ever." Gally calls for Thomas to be punished because only runners are allowed in the maze. He also doesn't like the fact that the girl knew who Thomas was. He's scared that the elevator hasn't gone back down since they took out the girl. Newt says Thomas can be locked up overnight without any food, but starting tomorrow, he's a runner. Some of the gladers go back into the maze to look at the carcass of the griever, which further upsets Gally. Inside it they find a weird device that has an electronic display reading the number 7. The device is also marked WCKD. The gladers realize whoever sends them supplies also made the grievers. Minho shows Thomas a map of the maze. There are different outer sections that open each day as the maze changes, and each outer section is numbered. Last night, Section 7 was open. The girl wakes up, and starts throwing stuff at the gladers below from the top of a tower. Thomas yells up to her to identify himself, and she agrees to let him come up. He tries to explain that her memory was wiped, but in a few days she'll remember her name. She says she already remembers her name, it's Teresa. And she remembers Thomas too. He tells her that he's had dreams about her and a lady saying that, "Wicked is good." When Teresa woke up, she found 2 syringes in her pocket. That night, Thomas deals with his punishment of being locked up. Chuck visits him and brings him some food. He also asks Thomas to give his parents a little carved statue he made. Even though he doesn't remember his parents, he's sure his parents remember him and miss him. Thomas gives back the statue and tells Chuck that he'll be able to give that to his parents himself. The next morning, Thomas and Minho go into the maze along with the device they got from the griever. The device ends up making clicking noises and guides them to a new section Minho has never seen before. Minho is also concerned that all of the outer sections of the maze seem to be open. They get to a wide area marked WCKD loading dock that ends up in a dead end, but the device turns from red to green and opens a new path. That path leads to what looks like some sort of sewer tunnel. The edges of the tunnel have the same slime that the grievers secrete, so they go back to the glade. Thomas decides to use one of the syringes on the still-changing Albie, and it ends up making him better. When he comes around, he simply tells Thomas, "You were their favorite." The doors all over the maze begin to open and scores of grievers start pouring out. Chuck is grabbed by one of the grievers, but they saved him by hacking off its tail. The griever attack wipes out most of the gladers and destroys their village, and Albie is among the dead. After the attack, Thomas realizes that the venom from the griever stings helps the victim remember, so he takes the hacked-off tail and stings himself, and he remembers a little bit more. Thomas remembers that the maze isn't a prison, it's a test. He sees all the other gladers in incubation tubes, and a lot of them are in panic. He also sees himself as a scientist, along with Teresa. The gladers use the second syringe and Thomas is cured, and confesses to everyone that he's one of the people responsible for everyone being there. Gally is furious. He and his group tie Thomas and Teresa to stakes outside the entrance to the maze as an offering. However, half the group is still with Thomas, and frees them. Thomas tells Gally that he'd rather die trying to escape than die in the glade not trying, then takes a group into the maze. They get to the loading dock area from before and are attacked by grievers again. They go through the sewer tunnel and it leads to a locked door. They need a numerical code to get through, and realize that the code must be the sequence in which the outer sectors of the maze would normally open. Teresa types it in and everyone goes through a door, as walls crush all the grievers behind them. The gladers walk through some hallways until they find a door marked exit. They go through it and end up inside the lab from Thomas's dreams and memories. All the scientists are dead, and a video starts to play. The woman from earlier identifies herself as Ava Page, and tells them that there was global devastation by something called the flare. She was part of a controversial group called the World Catastrophe Killzone Department, WCKD, that believed in testing the kids so that they could monitor their brain activities and find a cure. While she speaks, guerrilla soldiers rush in behind her and start killing other scientists. She tells them she's glad they passed the first test and reminds them that Wicked is good. Before signing off, Paige shoots herself in the head. A door opens, but before anyone can leave, Gally shows up with a gun. He says that they all belong in the glade. He aims the gun at Thomas and shoots, but Chuck jumps in front of Thomas. Minho throws a spear at Gally, piercing his heart. Chuck hands the now bloody statue to Thomas before he dies. A group of men that look like the guerrilla soldiers from the video, rush in and takes the gladers outside to waiting helicopters. At first it looks like they're in the desert, but the camera pulls out to reveal that they're outside of what used to be a city. Buildings are destroyed and everything is covered in sand. In the final shot, it is shown that Paige is alive and wiping fake blood off her head. She says that the gladers have taken the bait, and that more kids have survived than she anticipated. The maze was a success, and now Phase 2 can begin as the helicopter flies away to the City of Ruins. Remember to like this video, and subscribe to this channel for more movie recaps.